So the word Hamas and the concept of Hamas, the organization of Hamas, the cult of Hamas, was designed by Ahmed Yassin during the First Intifada in 1987. And he was an imam and an activist, and Hamas is often described as an acronym from the words Haraka al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance movement. But in fact, the word Hamas is an Arabic word which means strength or bravery. Now, we might think that's it, but if you were to go over to Hebrew, which is the sister language of Arabic, you will find the word Hamas is also in Hebrew. It's very clear, and there's a very good example of the use of the word in the book of the prophet Ezekiel, in chapter 7, verse 23. But more than that, and I'm definitely not one, as you will know if you followed this channel, for conspiracy or for prophecies or for rash interpretations, but the verse in question, 7:23, is striking in what it says. I'm going to read it to you in Hebrew. Asa haratok ki haaretz ma'ala mishpat damim. Is going to make a chain for the land which is filled with crimes of blood. V'ha'ir mal'a Hamas. And the city, V'ha'ir mal'a, is full of Hamas, of violence. So the word in Hebrew, Hamas, means violence. And it is dominating the city, Ha'ir. I find that incredibly striking. But I'd like to use these 5 minutes to give you an overview of the history of Hamas, where it comes from, what it means, and who Ahmed Yassin is, and how he envisaged the development of Hamas and the links between Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and its involvement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the opposition between Hamas and the PLO. The current version of Hamas is made up of two parts, the Qassam Brigade and the political wing of Hamas. But since 2006, Hamas has been the legitimate government, the legitimately elected government of Gaza. But there is some credibility here because the elections took place in 2006 and no elections have taken place since. So I don't see that Hamas can possibly claim that it is democratically mandated if it hasn't had any elections in 17 odd years. That is an effective dictatorship. So it has squandered its democratic credentials. There are three main leaders to Hamas today. There's Mohammed Deif, the guest, the traveller, is the leader of the Hamas military and travels around so that no one can assassinate him, I suppose. Michael Burley, who wrote the excellent Blood and Rage, says Deif has been plotting Operation Al-Aqsa Flood for months. What he was doing was sending so many rockets to overwhelm the Israeli Iron Dome, the system that protects Israel, taking advantage also of the redeployment to guard Israel's various settlements in the West Bank. The West Bank is an expression about the West Bank of the River Jordan, taking advantage also of the Sukkot holiday, and particularly the settlements around Jenin. This left Gaza exposed and the kibbutzim around Gaza very vulnerable. And I think he was also taking advantage, maybe with the connivance of Iran, of the US distraction particularly over Trump and over the foreign issues of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the election, the impending election of between Trump and Biden, and of course this proxy conflict with Iran and the money paid potentially to Iran, the relaxation of sanctions on Iran, and possibly to salvage Obama's 2015 nuclear deal. He suggests, it's Michael Burley, as I say, in his excellent, he's written excellent books on this subject. He suggests that the Iran link and the attempt by Iran to scupper the growing friendship between Saudi and Israel. So Mohammed Deif is just one of the operators in this group. There's Ismail Haniyeh, and he is the senior political leader of Hamas, but is based in Qatar. He is backed by Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's strange because Hamas was formed by a Sunni group, and yet it has so much Shiite support in Iran and Hezbollah. And then there's the third person, Yahya Sinwar, who is the political leader in Gaza itself. Now, there have been 4 wars between Israel and Hamas, though I would dispute the term war. Israel this time has accused Hamas of kidnapping and invasion, clearly demonstrable on television. Hamas has accused Israel of occupation and human rights abuse, and this is something that is put out very much on the internet and is referred to on a regular basis. I think there's no doubt about the history, and I'll go into that later. The conflict goes back to the foundation of Israel in 1948, or even perhaps the various agreements at the end of World War I, like, for example, the Balfour Agreement and the agreements made with Lawrence of Arabia, the contradictory agreements, very much part of the British history and the British mandate in Palestine. But there's also the formation of the Muslim Brotherhood in, I think, 1927. With the end of the First Intifada and the Oslo Accords and the establishment of the West Bank and Gaza, there was a principle of the state of Palestine, the right for Palestine to have self-determination. And that starts in 1995. It ends with the Second Intifada in 2000. And it starts with initially the visit of Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount on the 28th of September and in 2000. This is really what breaks the peace accord, and it's very much part of a rejection of the peace accord, not only by Israelis and by the growth of Hamas, but also by not only by Israelis but also by Palestinians, with the particular growth of Hamas. And the trip of Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount in 2000 in September was a provocative action. He wasn't the prime minister, he was the leader of the opposition, but his visit sparked violence and ended in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit of 2005 with an agreement between President Abbas and Ariel Sharon, by that time president. But in the process, we see this outpouring of frustration and mistrust, including the assassination by an Israeli of President Rabin, all part of a rejection of the Oslo Accords, all part of a belief that too many concessions have been made to the Palestinians between 1993 and 1995. But for those concessions, the Palestinian leader, Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, recognized the existence of the state of Israel. A huge concession by the Palestinians. And to abandon that, to ignore that with the rise of the right-wing governments in Israel, starting actually with Netanyahu, then coming back to Netanyahu, and the constant, in any government must be prepared for the worst, and the plans for taking control of Gaza, the Field of Thorns plans, and so on. These are partly a wise precaution by a thoughtful and forethinking government, but nevertheless, they show a mistrust. They show a deep-seated anxiety about the bedrock of these negotiations and the peace accord between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And I think you've got to you've got to be sympathetic to the Israeli anxiety at the same time as recognizing that there has to be a solution. Now, the problem with those solutions are they're rooted in a very, very careful choice of words. And the problem is words do not automatically mean actions. And if we go all the way back to 1917, we go back to the Balfour Declaration, we go back to the promises made to Lawrence of Arabia, these are words which are contradictory. And if we're going to get a peace with the Palestinian community and the Israeli community, that has to be a peace where words are not playing tricks. And we go back again to that idea that the word and the thing, they're the same meaning in Hebrew. Davar. So to play around with words is to play around with things. And that is in the Hebrew language. So it becomes nonsensical to say one thing and to mean something else. Which is, of course, exactly what we have been doing for years. At the heart of the Arab-Israeli conflict are the three promises made by Britain to differing sides at the end of the First World War. The first is the correspondence between Sharif Hussein and MacMahon. The second is the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which divided up the Arab land into a parody of European national states. And the third is the Balfour Agreement, which is a letter that was sent during 1917 promising the land of Palestine to the Zionists, to the people who became the modern-day Israelis. So you've got these two contradictory promises being made by Britain, one of the land to the Arabs and the other of the land to the Jews. And that contradiction underpins all the problems that begin with the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood in the final days of the Ottoman Empire, the redefinition of the Muslim Brotherhood in the days leading up to the establishment of the modern state of Israel, the initial wars between Israel and the neighboring Arab states, and the Second Intifada leading up to now the siege of Gaza, which, maybe that is the triumph of militant Islam or the catastrophe of militant Islam, but the Muslim Brotherhood is the key organization which lies behind militant or the rise of militant Islam. And various branches have been set up since its inception in Egypt in 1928. In Jerusalem, for example, in 1946, though that was building on groups active in Gaza and Nablus in 1943. So that was during the British Mandate, 2 years before the establishment of the modern state of Israel. And one of its leaders, Sayyid Qutb, sees the establishment of Islamic rule, the establishment of various national movements leading to the merging of states into a global Muslim Ummah. And the Muslim Brotherhood, but it sort of divides into two different types. It's achieved legitimate authority in Egypt, in Jordan, in Kuwait, in Yemen, in Morocco, in Algeria, in Bahrain, and in Iraq. And maybe it's achieved some sort of opposition status in Libya, in Tunisia, in Saudi Arabia, and in Syria. And all of these all of these versions of the Muslim Brotherhood have been coloured by a national experience and actually quite a different set of aims, but they share perhaps one ultimate goal, which is the eventual establishment of a Muslim Ummah, a Muslim government. And there is also a debate within the Muslim Brotherhood about the various manifestations of their understanding about what the ends, what the final goal might be, and how to achieve that goal, and therefore whether it is appropriate to use violence, or the debate about the legitimacy of violence or not. And for the most part, the Muslim Brotherhood has opted for a peaceful process towards that end, as we can see, for example, in organizations like Al-Dawa wal Tabligh and Hizb al-Tahrir, the Liberation Party idea. But its manifestation in both Egypt and in Syria has embraced violence. And this is... So the Muslim Brotherhood is very much in contrast to organizations like Al-Qaeda, which from the very beginning pursued violence as a means to an end. But the Muslim Brotherhood is mostly a peaceful organization which has then fractured and blossomed to produce other organizations. Now, in Palestine, it's produced four. The Fatah movement, which is essentially religious, the PLO, which is essentially nationalistic, and so led for so many years, dominating Israeli politics, led by Yasser Arafat, the Islamic Jihad movement in early 1984, which was very much inspired by... I mean, one has to be very careful with the names. The Fatah movement was very much inspired by the Iranian Revolution, the success of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. But the Liberation Party in 1952, one of the earliest, was the idea of establishing a Muslim rule, a caliphate, but not by violence. And the Hamas manifestation is something that grew out of the feeling of oppression, out of the feeling that violence was a solution. So it's an interpretation growing out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that also explains why it is so difficult for Egypt, which has rejected the Muslim Brotherhood, to open its borders to Gaza. I think this is getting rather long, so we're going to have to come back to this later. But that essentially is what I think we might define as part one.